is on Zoom, but.
All right, we are on the air, and it is our November 18th work session. It may look like we have no quorum because there's only 2 council members in the room, but actually our council president Anderson is on Zoom with us. So we do have 3. Councilor Stavengard will not be joining us today, and Councilor Khosrowshahi will come in, I'm sure, in a couple of minutes. So with that, we'll turn it over to Peter Pastorelli and Adam Moore.
And Mayor, I might just add before we start, just 2 kind of procedural notes. I'm going to have to disappear at 4:45. Joseph will be acting city manager during that. I just have to run a kid home, and I'll be back to the regular session. And then we do have a hard stop tonight at 5:30 to get an executive session in. So let's try to try to be brief, both this one and the agenda item to follow.
Okay. I am just going to turn it on. Okay. Hi, good to see you all again. I'm going to jump right into the third quarter staff accomplishments. So looking back at what we were doing back in July and September, and some things that we've accomplished along the ways. We've been working with a almost completely new Parks and Rec board. We have 4 new members who joined us this summer, but 3 of the existing members had only been there a short time as well. We've been working really hard with getting the Parks and Rec board caught up. So we have new bylaws adopted, the first adopted bylaws that we're aware of since 2014. While I know nobody really likes working on bylaws and some things, we might need to make a few little tweaks. And those tweaks would come in the form of adding on alternatives to the DAC. These would probably just be a couple short sentences into that. And then also, we do have 1 existing permanent committee, which is the D City Committee, and they are in the PAR bylaws, and it seems like if we are going to go down the route, this is a little bit of foreshadowing, but if we do go down the route where we are going to have a permanent naming committee with a PAR representative on there, we might want to, for consistency's sake, just acknowledge those in the PAR bylaws as well.
Can I tell you just about the DAC alternates? So the DAC I did get updated to allow for alternates, but I asked at the meeting last week what the plan was, or how they were selecting them, and what timeline. And I think Insecurity didn't really have a good answer for that. I think they usually do their recruitment for new members in the summer.
Okay.
So I think they're going to probably be doing alternates as part of that.
Okay.
So I don't think what I'm saying is I don't think we're in any rush.
Okay. Yeah, you know, our position descriptions in the bylaws already state that the vice chair would step in to fill in for the chair when they're not available. We just might want to add in a sentence to clarify that could include the DAC, unless council gets to we have been working very diligently on a naming policy and a separate donation policy. There is currently a survey on Engage Milwaukie. When I checked this yesterday, there were 48 responses to that survey. So good job getting the word out on that. And we will next see that naming policy and a separate memorial and donation policy January 6th. My partner in policy, Gabriella, and I will be meeting with the subcommittee in early December to go over the results of the surveys, and we may be bringing some tweaked policies to you all in January. But we're going to see what the community feedback is on that. Now, PAR does have existing goals. The existing goals have kind of been repeated multiple times. All all the boards and committees, as I think you're all aware, do need to do a study session with you all as an annual report and report back on their goals. I think where we're at with PAR right now is there's a feeling amongst the board that the existing goals are probably too many and too robust and lack some specificity. They might also be missing some of the work that we are doing that maybe they feel like they need to advocate for. And so all that is to say that PAR feels like they do need to make some tweaks to their goals. And in looking at the next 3 or 4 months of work, there was some concern that was brought up last month about being able to come to that March study session with revised goals and a list of accomplishments. So PARB was wondering if it was perhaps maybe possible to get a little bit more time to work on those goals, recognizing that Earth Day is coming up and our February meeting has been dedicated to a public design charrette with Metro. So we've lost a meeting in there as well. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on those.
Well, I don't think council generally dictates when committees come do their check-in. I mean, we let staff schedule that. And
I think what worked nicely last year was that study session where we gave each board kind of 30 minutes. And did
Oh, right.
So I think that's what our plan is for March.
Oh, okay.
And so I think that what PARB will probably update you on is progress on the existing goals rather than brand new goals at that time.
I think there just needs to be some rationalization of those goals and the existing city council goals, so that those are just more synchronized and they feed each other. And I think that's doable and commendable. But I think that the from my perspective of the PARB is they're getting in stride, but they're anxious to sink their teeth into doing things rather than worrying about policy and rules and Robert's rules of orders and all that other stuff. So, yeah.
We are certainly trying to find some balance of action and policy and provide recommendations for things that might be coming down the line versus provide some policy things that we're going to accomplish right now tonight. And so we're trying to find that balance with PARB, and I think they just kind of find themselves in a position where between the holidays and some of the things that we've got on our plate in the spring, maybe don't expect to see all brand new goals in March.
They have 8, right? Or 6?
6.5. 6.5. There's a lot of sub-bullet points in there. Like, we really decided that a while ago that we were going to stick to similar goals and just found ourselves kind of adding to them. And I think we have an opportunity now, as you said, to try and find some time over the next couple of months to whittle them down to what is most important and align them better with the citywide goals. Okay, nature, neighborhoods, community choice. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. The first slide is, I just want to make sure that the viewing public and everybody is kind of aware the basics of the program. So the community choice program was piloted by Metro last year in Washington County. In Clackamas County, we've seen twice as much participation. 178 projects were submitted. 83 went out to the first vote. The first round of voting had over 1,000 people, 1,400 people participating. They had 600 in Washington County. So the participation and the excitement around this, particularly with our constituents here in Milwaukie, has really been quite impressive. It's also really quite stretched the timeline that exists right now. And so I think where we found ourselves right now is in a situation where we have a lot of projects, and we're going to, even before we go into the next round of development of these projects, maybe need to whittle those down a little bit, or have some real honest conversations about how many projects we can get matched for. And so these are projects that are expected to be $250,000 in total budget. Now, they can be part of a larger project, but only expect another $165,000 of new grant dollars.
Yeah, see that, I did not understand that in the materials Metro put out. I thought it was like expect 250,000 and yeah, you had to have a match somehow.
Yeah, so $85,000 a match gets you $165,000 in total project. And we will talk about some of the other project or programs that they have that are related to this, but this is just the community initiated program. We expect those to be awarded now a little bit later, probably around this time next year. When we get that draft IGA from Metro, we'll have 2 years to finish that out, which means that we will have some time to codify our match, maybe make some tweaks and adjustments in the program. That might take some time. We've got 2 years to do that. But once we have a signed IGA, we'll have 3 years to implement it.
Is the city the IGA signer for everything in Milwaukie, or could there be private, other entities who are the awardee and are signing the IGA?
We would be the awardee.
Okay.
We would be the awardee with partnerships that we can build with the community and recognizing those matches however they come in. But this would be an IGA from Metro. This would be a grant that the city does receive.
I think the other piece I would just add, so NCPRD can certainly be a sponsor for a project that's within the park district, so.
Yes. And so, yes, so Metro approached the city, Gladstone, James Lodge, Oregon City. They approached many other people about being jurisdictional partners as well as NCPRD. And so they will receive the grants and be required to do the execution.
Okay.
There is a separate capital program within Nature and Neighborhoods. That is not community choice. That is the traditional jurisdictional partner applies for a project they already have on the books. Those we have found out as of Friday, those will now be $2 million grants, and they will have $7 million to spend next year. And then there's also, which we will talk about in a separate slide, some money perhaps for some acquisition to meet the community's goals. So speaking of acquisition, Metro found when they were working in Washington County that people were saying, hey, I want this type of park here, or I want this type of nature space here, or can't there be something over here? And they realized they had no money in the existing program to acquire property. And so Metro has set aside $15 million that could be available to meet the goals of the community choice program. There were several ideas that were submitted by the community. None of them really existed in a place where we have a park desert. If you might remember, a couple of study sessions ago, we looked at where people don't have a park or a green space within walking distance. We didn't see any suggestions from the community that fit those needs, and we as a staff didn't find anything in those areas that really jumped out at us as filling that gap. And so instead, we took what the suggestions from the community were, and we decided to prioritize properties around 4 existing locations. The idea being that if we expand our holdings within an existing location, then there will be less O&M that we'll have to deal with. Kind of the overarching idea is if we can't have a park or green space where we're missing one, let's expand one that we already have. And so we asked Metro, and Metro will be handling all the negotiations to look into private property around Elk Rock Island, the Willow Place Natural Area, the very large farm outside of our city limits, but within inside of our UGMA and next to Fernberg, and then Scott Park. The process for Metro will be to see if they have a willing seller. Metro will only work with a willing seller, so they're approaching those property owners right now. In the event that they have more willing sellers and at a price that is larger than that $15 million pot of money, then Metro will have to institute some form of competitive, I should say competitive, process in the future. What that competitive process looks like between the different jurisdictional partners, we're not sure. They won't know that until they know how many willing sellers they have and then what the assessed value of those properties might be. But those are negotiations that are going on now. We have another project meeting with Metro tomorrow, and I will make sure to ask to see if there's anything worth reporting out there. So, where are we now in community choice? We have gotten through the first round of voting. As I mentioned, there was over 1,400 people that participated. Everyone that participated got 10 votes. And initially, Metro was going to allow 30 projects through that first round of voting. What they found is that because our constituents are so excited about parks and green spaces, that perhaps there wasn't a very good geographical representation of those. And so they decided to expand the project list down to 50 with the request that jurisdictional partners take a real close look at that and recognize that there is a match component to this, and with the hopes that maybe we look at some of the projects and deem them either unfeasible or maybe that they need to be combined into another project prior to this next round of development, which we expect in January and February. Why was there a lack of geographical representation? Well, because 19 out of the 50 projects that made it were from Milwaukie. The top 3 were in Milwaukie. 6 of the top 10 were in Milwaukie. 9 of the 10 were in Milwaukie. Now, out of those 50, Metro only had money to pay 15 of those. We had 19 on those. And looking at it with multiple jurisdictional partners, multiple areas of the county that are covered in this program, it may behoove us to start to get a little bit and find a way to enable that process. And that would happen before the 4 public workshops that are coming in. Those 4 public workshops will be hosted by the different parks and rec boards or committees that exist within the region. So they'll be coming to Harvard in February. They'll be going to the PAC in February. There's also existing groups in Oregon City and Palestine who will be working with. So the next steps, what we have done is I spent about 2.5 hours with Metro on Friday and a good deal of time on Saturday going through the list and coming up with a list of recommendations. We're going to share that list of recommendations tomorrow evening with Barb and get their feedback on our recommendations. And then on December 9th, we can bring those to new council at the study session to get your feedback. And then we will share that with Metro. As I mentioned, we expect development online starting around January. We will have the design workshops in February, and second round of voting will probably be in March or April now.
So, I mean, I totally, I think this is great. I do think I get your point that we need to sort of prioritize and narrow. But we had a lot of projects that were put forward by people outside who don't come to these meetings and who aren't on CARB and who aren't in the Milwaukie Parks Foundation or whatever. So you have, the swim dock has its group of people that got behind it. The Minthorn Springs has the Wetlands Conservancy. How do you, if you're like estimating costs or what's feasible in these grant restrictions, how do you get that input from those people who put them out there?
So they will, so just like with the first round, there will be this period of development and we expect it to happen in January. And so that will happen both online and in person. People have questions about projects or whether it didn't make the cut or whether it was combined or whether maybe there was some development that happened prior to or after they submitted the idea. Because we did see some of that because people in the public were invited to provide feedback on all of the projects. I think that we will be able to gather all of that feedback from people in January. And if they feel as though we given the wrong recommendations to Metro, and I believe that we will have an opportunity to discuss that in January and February.
I would also add, I think, we do have some projects that align with some of the other bigger projects that we have going on and some other programs like our Good Neighbor program. So there's some alignment there and some sense of project budget and match that we're able, the financial feasibility component.
Yeah.
It's easier on some of those projects to identify as opposed to some other projects that are out there, so.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's a really good question, Mayor, and when staff and I and Councilor Massey as the goal lead met yesterday, there's kind of two things I think what we should do on the staff side. One is just promote the heck out of, December 9th and let people know that there is public process happening by their council and they should tune in and weigh in if they'd like. But two is push Metro. And I think you're kind of getting to this, Adam, that if Metro's putting you in a bind to give input, saying, well, hey, but it's still your public process that you're running. And I hope they're communicating to all who have been engaged sort of how this sausage making happens, because it really is their process. So I think with both of those things, we can be covered and feel good that we have done right by our park stakeholders, but also are putting the onus on Metro to communicate how the funnel will work.
Yeah, and this is something that we'll discuss tomorrow evening and on the 9th. But when we're looking at this list of 19 projects out of 50, we are looking to how likely is it for us to have $85,000 available, knowing that we don't have any budget to allocate towards projects. We are looking at projects where we might be likely to get another grant, where a partner might be able to help us with some fundraising, or where we're able to dovetail onto a larger project that we already have a lot of support from. And I think we're also looking at where do we have existing partners that we can feel like we can go into a murky situation and iron out all of those sort of challenges that are likely to happen with so much participation. I think I'll also just say that I feel like this process got a lot murkier due to its popularity and due to the outreach that was done.
Sure. Good problem to have.
Good problem to have, but it is a problem. And I think Metro has extended the time that it has extended their timeline to try and clear up some of the confusion or some of the competitiveness that has maybe been created here that didn't exist in Washington County. Good Neighbor grants. So speaking of Good Neighbor grants and potential match sources, our grant agreements are still under development. Those, Peter can speak more to those.
Yeah, and just to add, I just had a brief discussion with Justin earlier this afternoon. We're trying to just sort out some of the requirements related to funding. What are some of the proposals? How do we make sure that our nonprofit partners that are used to being involved in receiving grants, they definitely have some of the things that are we generally require in terms of insurance, trying to sort out how do we play with the NDAs that are project sponsors, and what are those? How do we work with them to make sure that they're able to fully participate at the table? And there's a couple of things that Justin and I briefly talked about today that I think we'll be able to fix that, but just trying to get those details, those I's dotted and T's crossed in our requirements for providing funding. It's taken longer. I probably put the program application phase out sooner than I probably should have as it relates to, having that agreement language documented and laid out. We're getting through it, and we'll have a better second round and probably be able to get through stuff.
And how many grants are there in this first round?
We've got Elk Rock Island Restoration, Newport Springs Boardwalk, our Milwaukie Community Stormwater Engagement, and the Burnham Williams Backyard Residential.
We had 7 submissions, 1 was withdrawn, and these 4 were awarded out of 6 existing grants. That was based on the criteria that was put out by them. So where we're at now is as Peter mentioned, we're trying to get those grant agreements underway. We will be reaching out to our partners who are awarded groups to start coordinating them with their scope of work, whether additional funding opportunities, perhaps through nature and neighborhoods. And then we will be there to provide some really technical assistance and make sure that we can walk them through the different design and permitting processes that we have. But these will be their grants. Now, the city does also have the opportunity to apply for these grants as well at an amount that is greater than the $50,000 limit that we have. Since some of these projects already are related to the Nature and Neighborhoods, we thought that one source of grant match for the Nature and Neighborhoods program might be these food neighborhood funds. Now, it's important to note that the money that we just awarded probably will not count as match, just because it will probably, at least we hope, will be well on its way to being spent prior to those Metro agreements, but those are things that we can work out with Metro and our partners when we get there.
I think we can utilize the Good Neighbor program as a source of match dollars for nature and neighborhood as long as it's within that geographical boundary and it meets those requirements. But I think generally those projects, when we've looked at them, they have. I think for the most part, with some few select projects, they've met like the eligibility requirements. Not all of them have met the geographical.
Yeah, the geographical can be
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of daylight a little bit of it. I mean, I don't think it's a big concern, but, you've got Milwaukie, Wetlands Conservancy, Backyard Habitat. Those are established groups with established fundraising and, management of grants and all of that. The Elk Rock is a little bit more of it's a coalition of groups, as I understand it, and I'm not fully in the weeds on what they propose, but it's the Parks Foundation, it's the Island Station Neighborhood, and it's DAM, as I understand it. I'm not sure who's the fiscal agent and who's got the management of any kind of grants or work that comes out of that. And so I guess just having better clarity, I mean, I'm sure this has occurred to you guys, but it occurred to me.
It is, and that goes to some of the discussions that I had with Justin. Like, the NDA is the fiscal sponsor for that. There's some different requirements than if it would be as the Parks Foundation or Milwaukie, right? So we're trying to sort those sort of details out and make sure that everybody sort of can participate, but we have to make some adjustments in terms of how we provide that funding and what their insurance requirements, how how do they meet insurance requirements that we have and access agreements that they have?
Well, and then the other thing is that brand is for our property. And so we were already probably going to be more involved in that and in the backyard of residential. And we have existing plans that we're looking to revise, and I think that they are hoping to implement, at least in part, and then inform future versions of that plan. So I think that you have identified a situation that we run into these sort of small projects all the time. And we will just kind of need to be willing to work with our partners and help take them across the line a little bit if it's necessary.
And just for transparency, speaking about Brock, we did get a request this week to consider a letter of support by, I believe, the Friends of Elk Brock for another project. And I've circulated that to staff for review and input. So just to your greater point, Mayor, I think it's a good one about just kind of tracking all the efforts related to our project.
Okay, what we've got planned, so we're already halfway through the fourth quarter, but are working in financial planning. So we're working on completing the scope of work and a draft, I should say RFQ now, from the Greenspace management plan, and we hope to have that finalized in front of Emma by the 19th. We've got a month to go on that.
Helpful due date meeting.
We have been working on developing our Parks and Greenspace initial budget requests as part of the 27-28 budget process. So that is something that is moving forward. And one thing that is a little bit new for you all, council, is we've had in here in the work plan putting together a financial strategy or a funding strategy for Milwaukie Bay Park. But as Kellogg is also a priority project and has great need, as these nature and neighborhood projects come up, as other community initiated projects come up, and just as capital replacement is required, I am starting to see the need to really forecast out these grants and these applications and source of potential funding so that we don't find ourselves 2 years from now going, oh, did we promise a land and water conservation grant to 2 different groups as a source of funding or match? Like, let's start to have those conversations now. The need and priority you have established in your goal as Milwaukie Bay Park. We know that Kellogg is kind of a close second and has a different set of needs, but there are going to be needs coming up, and there are only so many sources of money that we can get through the grants. So it might behoove us to start looking not just at 2026 and 2027, but further down the road of where we can expect to apply for grants and where we can expect to have need for grant match. So we're not overextending ourselves or overpromising.
Well, let me just add one thing here, kind of related to the same issues we talked about on Good Neighbor, is that, basically we're looking for, an entity to be the belly button that we go to, okay? There may be 3 partners in there, but we're going to deal with one person who's going to be, responsible for this thing, and that's just kind of the way it works. Otherwise, we're having to manage 3 different groups and run the project ourselves. And so I think that there's a sort of a corollary example here in Kellogg, in that I don't think that we're really developing the funding strategy. We're identifying the funding strategy for Kellogg, because I think it's fundamentally different from Milwaukie Bay Park. So that's nitnoid, but I think it's important.
So public engagement, so we're continuing our grant agreements with Neighbor and working with our awardees there. And we're going to continue to work with those partners to develop those projects. We are in the process of developing a website that points to external sources for water quality reporting that came out of one of the discussions with council and is being led by Natural Resources and Climate Manager, Katie. And we are continuing to partner with BARB, the Council and Metro on these Good Neighbor programs. We'll see that onward into the future, not just in this quarter. sometimes it feels weird breaking things up by quarter because some of these things just span so long because like we're repeating ourselves sometimes. Now let's get to those major projects. Next step on Milwaukie Bay Park, of course, council, you all had a special session. You responded to the latest round of negotiations from the Board of County Commissioners. You asked for a response by December 1st. City and county staff are still coordinating, although we do understand that the Board of County Commissioners is on recess to December 2nd. I say this not to inform you of what you are already aware of and more well-versed than I am, but just to make sure that we daylight that for the community.
And do we know, is NCPRD staff, I mean, the whole county shouldn't be on recess till December 2nd, just the board, but is NCPRD following up with Metro about their proposal to loan us Greenspace money?
We have reached out to Metro, and as of today, I've not received a response. When Joseph and I connect with NCPRD and county staff on Thursday, that'll be our first question. As the proposal came from them, so I'd like to know if they've had any further conversations. But we'll also continue to try to get an answer ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then just to share some updates with the community on the Kellogg Restoration Project next steps. We might need to lean on some other staff in the room here if you've got questions, but Kellogg leadership team is on the agenda right now for a December 6th work session. Staff have requested a written response to council's letter by that time. And staff have continued to contribute 10 plus hours a week in project meetings, design discussions, and technical coordination to support the project. I think was maybe looking for an opportunity for some discussion around that.
Oh, I don't actually think I was. I just wanted to kind of daylight that we continue to be at the table a lot. And I think that it will be very helpful on December 16th to get the project team's answers to some of the questions, because again, it is a significant outlay of staff time and resources. And so I think having clarity from them on some of the priorities you articulated in the letter will really help our staff focus their time on those resources.
I know I heard from the project team earlier on that they wanted to see our staff engaging, and seeing that I think is really heartening to me. This is a really important project. I'm glad that we're dedicating the staff time to seeing this come to fruition. So I appreciate
That
that work.
wasn't changed.
That's not, yeah.
I don't think that's a new feature.
I'm saying I'm glad that it is.
And just out of full transparency, I've been engaged on like how these properties, how this project affects existing parking and Greenspace properties, but I'm not on the leadership team. I'm just here because we're talking about parks and Greenspace. You want to really talk with Mandy and Joseph on some more of these things. And preview, where are we going between January and March? So we're going to get out that solicitation for the RFQ/RFP for the comprehensive Greenspace management plan. We're going to incorporate parks and Greenspace work into the 2027 budgets. We're going to host public development workshop with major neighborhoods. So it's going to happen on February 19th at the park meeting. We're going to develop a funding strategy and grant application forecaster for future parks and Greenspace capital needs. And we're going to apply for grants in the transfer of grants, plans, contracts, and construction specs of Milwaukie Bay. I know that there are a lot of questions around Milwaukie. Those questions are extremely hard to answer without having those contractors under contract. Those contractors who handle the design and permitting phase of things, and those contractors that handle the construction, they're the people that were hired to answer many of the questions that the community and you all have on the project. So it's really, really hard for us as staff to provide, whether it's a funding strategy or a timeline, or cost estimates, until we know that we have those construction specs and those contracts in hand. That is kind of the origin point of all those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, that's really one of the critical paths, like, was getting.
Can you quickly clarify you mentioned this is the second time we're seeing the green space management plan on these slides. Can you expound a bit on?
Well, that's a really good question. We have a frame, very initial scope that looks at how should the city look towards managing its green space. And that piece of green space includes a couple different things are nested within that. So it's our, perhaps, the natural areas that we have that are managed by NCPRD. It's perhaps those spaces that are managed by NCPRD. It's how do we incorporate urban forest work with that? How do we utilize the green spaces that we have also as infrastructure for stormwater management? So it's a broadly based plan. And it's really going through and looking at all of those different features and identifying goals and strategies to how do we take care of that space and utilize it as we can in the city and develop those strategies and goals to do that. So it's a process that I think involves engagement with the community and council on how do we want to manage green spaces in the city. It also looks at sort of future acquisition space as well. So it's a document that, I think one of the things that we talked about was developing sort of that statement of work and having that conversation.
So this would include conversations about the parks, deserts, and other areas in our city that don't.
Identifying what are our goals in terms of level of service, right? There would be sort of that level of service discussion that we would want to have. I think there's still some discussion that we're having internally of like how comprehensiveness of this and the scale of it. And those are the discussions that we're still trying to work on, and scope and scale, and have discussions with Barb, and then come back and have a discussion with council before we actually go out and do that solicitation. So
There are a handful of assets owned by, maybe not owned by, but maintained by NCPRD that I've heard concerns about from members. I think about Fernbrook Park, Water Tower Park. Is that included in the management of NCPRD assets included in this?
perhaps. I think that's sort of that, and maybe there's perhaps a desire of what that level of service is. I would say that Water Tower Park's an interesting one because that's actually a property where a park is co-located on a water facility, right? So, the primary use of that space is for water reservoir and well pumping. And then we've been able to utilize that because we have that space there to put up.
Yeah.
I think that there are, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I think there are a few things that we've been talking about over the last year or so about how do we respond to community-initiated requests for amenities, and what are the guiding principles, what does the outreach strategy look like, how do we incorporate that in with NCPRD, what do we do when NCPRD says, hey, that's a great idea, but further down the priority list for us than it is for Milwaukie. I think we had a conversation about public-private partnerships and what sort of business opportunities might exist in our parks and green spaces. And I think what we heard from that conversation is that there's a lot of interest in our parks and green spaces, and we will continue to have the conversations with you and with PAR, but perhaps there needs to be this this document that pulls all those conversations together, that we are able to put together in a nice neat bow and present to the community and all of our stakeholders to try and address the gaps that exist. And so, we've noticed, for example, that there is a gap in how do we handle partnerships in the community, or how do we handle when the community comes to us for a request for a property that is inside the park district. There are several other areas where I think there are gaps, like how do we manage Elk Rock Island? When we don't have parks, where we have a natural resources team, but the natural resources team already has a set bandwidth. And so I think it's those sort of things where we see gaps in our relationship within CPRD or gaps within our decision-making, that now is the time to put together that plan. And we know that, perhaps some of our business partners or some members of the community would prefer us to move forward on some of their ideas without waiting for a plan. But if there's one thing that is true in the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector, it's that doing it right the first way is a lot cheaper and more effective than having to do it again. And so I think this Parks and Greenspace Management Plan is an opportunity to address a lot of those outlying conditions and set ourselves up with a framework that it's much easier for us to make these determinations in the future.
Well, as to the council president's, what he said he's hearing from people, I mean, I assume when people have concerns about Fernbrook Park and about Watertown Park, that's about the condition of the play equipment. It's not like the trash isn't being picked up or they're not mowing or whatever. I will say at the DAC meeting, and I'm going to give some more notes from the DAC meeting and the council reports later tonight, but Director Selly did say they have taken down they used to have a thing on the website where you could request maintenance, you could report maintenance problems, and you could request amenities last December, and they had to be in by December to be worked into the budget, blah, 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 into the CIP. They've taken that down. And their budget is so dire, and I'll get into a little bit more of that at council reports, but it's so dire that there's really no hope of new playground equipment unless unless somebody's raising money for it, independent of NCPRD, until whatever point they go out for more funding. So I wouldn't count on them replacing any playground equipment. The Parks Foundation has a campaign to raise some money to do that, but it's got $15,000 or something. It's not anywhere near what it costs to replace a playground. But yeah, I would be reticent to encourage people to think they're going to get playgrounds replaced in the next few years till we get either NC. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, I think we probably need to move on that.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're
Speaking about some council actions that have been advanced. So council had a discussion with the public and private partnerships and water quality testing. Provided direction on different categories of green space and for future mapping and management strategies. So what is a green space, what is a park, and where do we have those gaps in levels of service? You supported part through the new member orientation, the bylaw development, the elections, and the preparation of new goals. That new board has had their faith in the fire hydrant with all of the things that we have going on and that and they have really dedicated a tremendous amount of time to getting up to speed, and they're working very hard. We really do appreciate council's support in doing that. I think we have a really tremendous board that really cares a lot about what we're doing, and we're seeing this step up in a lot of different ways. And of course, council has continued to advocate for Kellogg and Milwaukie Bay Park, as we discussed quite a bit this evening. Remaining Q4 and Q1 priorities. Councilor Massey, do you want to present?
Yes, so basically, I had hopes that we would begin an NDA roadshow this quarter. I guess I was, maybe it was wishful thinking that we would have some sort of decisions to go forward on MVP. I will tell you that I think we're just at the point now where we're just going to kick the can on reach and daylighting of the information, and we've already started that. We did that during the special session, and so my plan is that we would start the roadshow and just tell people that we go and tell them the status of the MVP, wherever it is, whatever the truth is, we would put it out there and that kind of thing, because we've done things like special session. My article in the pilot for December will also help daylight that. But I think it's, if you use all of the communication avenues that you have possible. And so my plan is just to go out to the NDA starting in the new year and tell them where we are at the time. And that's the message.
Okay. And I guess when this arose on our council, actions, I thought it was a shared thing, but are you intending to do it all?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just want to have a continuity of message being the same,
Okay.
So,
Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to Island Station's meeting tomorrow, and I am expecting to get some questions
I'm not telling you not to. I'm just telling you I'm going to go in
in the first
the
quarter.
first quarter of the
Okay.
year. Yeah.
Fair.
Okay. Continue to try to advance and adopt the MVP IGA. I think you all know about that. We were going to discuss the metro projects at the works session on December 9th. We wanted to make sure that, there's kind of been this impetus to hurry up on the metro things. And so I want to give the PAR, an opportunity to weigh in. That's what we've asked them to join to do. And so, that's why I said, let's give them the list and get their thoughts before we go off and do other things despite what other pressures there may be, because they want to participate, and if you start going around them and not letting them participate, then they're not going to be very happy. And we're going to meet with the College Restoration team on December 16th, as we've talked about previously. We're going to weigh in on the public engagement strategy for the Greenspace management strategy that Peter talked about. That this one is not fully formed yet. I think Peter's got some ideas about an advisory committee and stakeholder roundtables. Already talked about the road show. We're going to do that. I'm going to start that in January. Then we're going to, if we have any clarity, we need to start thinking about an MVP fundraising plan. But we don't know what the delta is. We just don't know what the delta is. But we know that there's going to be some kind of delta. And we have to come to grips with how's that going to be. And then, there's still a lot of opportunity for grants out there that Adam referred to. So I don't think, we have to think about fundraising for 50% of the project. But it's going to be some percentage of it if we want to get it done. And, part of that fundraising campaign may be that we may have to come to grips with the idea that there may be a phase 3 and then there may be a phase 4, however we call it. But we kind of have to, that is one that we will be in charge of the fundraising strategy on. But when we're going to have clarity to even get that started, it's unclear to me. January, February, that would be great. I'm not so sure of that.
And just to, not to put any pressure on those conversations in January or February, but a lot of the grants that are out there, including the 2 that lapsed on Milwaukie Bay Park, those are spring applications. So that is a conversation that is going to be very timely in January and February. I do also think that we were, if time allows, maybe looking for a little bit of guidance on the Greenspace management strategy or Greenspace management plan. There are a lot of different ways that we can run this project or this planning process. We can run it through PARB, we can run it through a separate technical advisory committee, or we can simply take it out and do community engagement, whether that's through a series of focus groups our stakeholder roundtables or convening our different partners. I think we were looking for just a little bit of guidance this afternoon on that. Does anybody have any strong feelings on that?
Which of those options would require the least staff capacity?
Stakeholder roundtables.
I think, I mean, the PARB isn't going to have expertise on all the things that are in there, right? Stormwater management, there are different stakeholders for some things like stormwater issues and tree code. I mean, you've also got the tree board, right? But I do think, so I do think there are things that are kind of beyond PARB's mandate. And so stakeholder roundtables makes perfect sense. I guess I'd still like to see PARB be
Yeah.
involved.
I think there's certainly a PARB's involved, PARB definitely needs to be involved, be involved in part of this as we develop this plan. I do think, though, there is also this sort of technical advisory piece, so whether it's a stakeholder roundtable, technical advisory committee, similar to what we did on our climate action plan. We had a series of meetings there. And we also had stakeholder roundtables involved in that, so there's a combination of those. But there are certainly technical people that can provide technical expertise to this development of this management plan. And I think we've recognized when we've interviewed different people from the community for spaces on boards and committees that they have those experts, they have expertise. So, the technical advisory committee perhaps has people from PAR, people from tree board, people from other boards and committees perhaps, or not currently involved in boards and committees. And, does it need to be something that's appointed by council, or could it be something that staff just reaches out and has a sort of an internal ad hoc technical advisory committee? So
I think it's great if we have, expertise, if we had some expertise on PARB and stormwater, but, like you said, we probably don't. But, it's not unusual for us to have a coalition of the willing, and they kind of get smart. And we all experience that, right? You've all had to learn something in these roles and this and planning commission and everything else. So we have a lot of people eager, and if you go to one of those meetings and you say, is anyone interested in this? You always get someone who is. And so that's just kind of the community we are. So I'm not too worried about not having someone with a lot of technical background in a particular subject.
So you're saying you would keep the PARB as the advisory?
Well, I think that they might be a member of the there might be a PARB member of the technical advisory committee. Sure. It's not like they would particularly lead it.
I'm fine with stakeholder engagement, setting those tables to develop elements of the plan, but I think then reviewing that by PARB and doing an engage outreach, all of that outreach should be a part of it. But for those technical pieces, that stakeholder engagement sounds fine.
I will say, just getting back to staff bandwidth and workload and things like that. So we absolutely love transparency and record keeping. One challenge that happens with some of these, particularly a PARB, is that if they rise to the level of a public meeting, and we start having to do these sorts of agenda setting, announcing, and record keeping for the technical advisory committee that we would for, say, PARB, that would add to that staff. That's where a lot of that work comes from. The work between, for stakeholder roundtables, yes, there would be a public meeting that the public is invited to, but if we don't have to take minutes and post agendas in the same ways that we do for a board or commission to keep rules, that is one of those areas where we might be in the same room.
I appreciate the conversation. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I've heard from, I guess Adam didn't have a name.
The stakeholder roundtables.
But we've got time to sort of still sort through this, but it's helpful to get this. So
Yeah.
I know don't have a whole lot of time. I don't know if there's another.
No, we're over time.
Just parks.
I think we're done.
Park visit.
Give them the hook.
All right, well, thank you, guys. That was very informative.
Thanks, Parks team.
And now we have our assistant city manager. Let's talk about.
Move up front so you don't have to ping pong, watch a tennis match. You can just Thanks, Steve.
Like how I sent you that email like an hour before. We figured out.
Public Works team. Good evening, Mayor.
Tonight.
We don't have time. We don't have a lot of time. So I just want to set a couple things. I know we have a hard stop at 5:30. I don't feel like we have to get everything figured out tonight when it comes to land banking. This is an important topic. It's one that's on the HBS. It's of interest to a lot of you personally and professionally. So we do need more time. We will happily continue this item into, I know there's meetings in January that could use an agenda item too. So just to let you know. With that, I wanted to just get someone you know well, Mandy Bird, our development project manager. Just going to walk through a little bit of our approach and what we've thought about when it comes to land banking strategy and get some feedback. And this is certainly not the end of the discussion. The beginning. Okay, pass it over to Mandy to get us started.
Thank you. So just for a little bit of context, land banking is the first item in the list of strategies in our housing production strategy from 2023. And that translated into part of the 2025 Council Goal Action Plan as well under the affordability goal and housing strategies. Just a refresher on that. And in the staff report, I talked about kind of, as I dove into this, there's kind of two different buckets of approaches to land banking. One is more high intensity, where you're actually doing a formal land bank. And then there's more of a middle ground approach where we've got some other ideas of policies that we can implement that don't actually require the level of staff capacity and financial resources as a formal land bank does. So, I just made a motion. It's very exciting to me.
Okay, we're done.
Because we don't necessarily have the capacity or the, long line of properties that would be in a pipeline for a land bank. That's kind of contributing to the staff recommendation. We can right size this policy to where it fits with what we're trying to do and still be strategic with land opportunities that come up. So one of these we were asked to elaborate a bit on, which is the right of refusal idea. And this one it's kind of like it gives the city a heads up before a property that's going to be up for sale goes to the open market. And there are some jurisdictions that I've looked into. Portland has done this on kind of a case-by-case basis for targeted properties that they are looking at for transit or, whatever their priorities are. And this was kind of like the idea for putting this in here for Milwaukie is we could target certain properties. And if you think about how the state protects mobile home parks, it's kind of the same idea where the law requires if the mobile home park owner is going to sell, they first have to notify the tenants of the mobile home park to give them an opportunity to organize an offer to maybe purchase it themselves. And so I'm not necessarily thinking that Milwaukie would do like a blanket policy across the whole city, but we could look at certain areas of the city or target certain properties that are of interest and include those specific parcels in a policy that would ask the landowner to notify us. And then if that did happen, that's when we call on our nonprofit partners and you bring them into the loop and see if any one of them would be able to do the purchase.
And so the seller has to be willing. This isn't a policy this isn't like an ordinance that makes them give us this right of first refusal. They'd have to be willing to do that. Am I correct in that?
I think it's an ordinance.
It is an
It would be an
ordinance.
ordinance.
It's an ordinance, and we would carve out parts of the city and say, anybody who's selling property in these chunks has to give the city
And
right
it's
of
just-
first refusal.
It's just a defined term, period of time. And if we don't find a deal by then, it just goes to open market. But it's just like, it gives us a little head start before it goes to open market. If this is like maybe one of those naturally occurring circumstances.
What is the typical length of time you need to do right of first refusal correctly?
To create the policy or to the timeline I'm talking about?
Timeline that you would need as a city to be able to, like, the city could not feasibly react within one day.
Right.
What is the amount of time that
Okay,
you would
that would
feasibly
be
need?
something we need to look into.
This is more, sorry, Council President, this is more or less like, is this of interest, because we can explore it even more. Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Options.
So I think follow on what Will is saying is that, although, the owner of the land, still has ownership of the land. But I can see, I guess my question is, I'd be surprised if there hasn't been pushback with these laws. Because if you add in even some nominal amount of time, like 60 days, 90 days, whatever it turns out to be, property owners, land, real estate developers, they're going to, I don't want to look at that.
Right.
I don't want my property sitting idle while, the folks in City Hall dither,
Have a negative impact.
So, has there been legal challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
I'd be surprised if there had.
Yeah, we'll have to look more into that. And I can find out who at Portland did work on the deal that used something like this, find out what the terms were of that.
Is there like an interest in general for even?
I'm interested, I just highlight that as I see that as that could be a big hassle.
I think I'd be interested to see it. I think, like you were saying, how Portland does it in very targeted ways. There are some targeted examples, like a lot by lot basis, not neighborhood by neighborhood basis, where I can see something like this working. I will say it does not make sense to me to do this right of first refusal if we don't have some type of fund to realistically purchase land. And like, we don't need to add an artificial time without actual fees.
I'll say that it's an interesting policy. I'm curious about it. It does irk me a little bit because it's like, government saying, hey, you're going to buy this property, but we're the first people you have to sell, like attempt to sell it to or give us the first option. That's a little, I don't know how much I like that, but I'm curious to know a little bit more about it and see if there's a softer approach as to just like, hey, you got 90 days and then a lot could be lost in 90 days for that homeowner.
And make it be the common good.
Hey, not good intentions, right?
I guess before you go on.
Bad decisions.
Yeah, I get that it feels a little big brotherish. But I guess, but I think about like the farm property on Monroe that got approved 2+ years ago for cottage clusters that never got built, right? It sounded like, from what I've heard you say over the years, they have tried to market that already to land banks or land trusts. So I don't know if the city brings, if like having this ability with a property like that, where we could bring more people to the table than they've already tried to bring to the table? I mean, if you think that having 60 days or 90 days with the city allows us to bring in players that wouldn't know about it and that might jump on that, then I'd be all for it. But if you think that those connections are already being made, I mean, we heard it with Dr. Valuri, right? He's talking to affordable housing developers and land trusts as well. So I guess, do we have the way to bring more people to the table that are already coming to the table in those scenarios?
I think anecdotally, I think yes and no, it's both. Because sometimes the property owner is also a developer who just knows Metro and knows the developing ecosystem. But quite frankly, there's a lot of property owners that don't know that. So that's when we could provide some value there. But yeah, it's not true all the time. Depends on who the owner is and who they're working with already. But on that case, the Monroe, that's owned by a developer who has been engaged with a bunch of other developers. So.
And is that one I mean, well, I don't want to get into the details of that one, but I guess I'm interested in exploring this more for those kind of scenarios. Yeah.
So just big picture wise, in our HPS timeline, and as well as in the affordability goal, we had this for getting some direction from you all tonight, or by the end of the year, and then starting implementation 2026 and beyond. And we've got some, we already kind of started our question and answer, but we have some guided prompts here for assisting with the discussion. So.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful too is just to go back to the second slide. We kind of talk through these and going through each one. So as Mandy kind of already talked about, there's land banking strategies or land banking programs that are very intensive, and those usually have a big fund associated with it. You can actually go out and be aggressive with buying property. Obviously, we try to right size it with our approach because we're not super rich, resource intensive city. So we threw out some ideas about creating a framework. So think about what types of, why would we land banking? I mean, it's in the HPS, so that means affordable housing in my mind's eye. But I think there could also be more concepts to consider. So like, where should we be looking, or where do you think the scale and the scope should be when it comes to land banking? Should it be all about housing? Should it all, are we talking about anything else, or is it just about affordable housing and restricted housing? Is there any economic development? There's parks, there's things that it could be associated, but when it comes to HPS, it's obviously housing focused. So just think about that as far as the policy framework. I do love, Council President, that you're already thinking about funding, because that's also another concept we would like to ask. Like, if we are going to do something that has any kind of meaningful programmatic element to it, it needs to be funded of some sort. In the past, we've kind of put $75K. This is when housing was a goal of the council, so things have changed. We had $75K a year, fiscal year. So those funds were partially used to purchase the acquisition or the auxiliary site that's part of Sparrow. So there was like a little bit of that land banking strategy already happening at that time, but we haven't done that again. I don't even know what's feasible when it comes to that. We have a few pots of money, obviously, with CET, but that's something to think about. And also, as Manny talked about, we're built out city, lots of parcels, like really small parcels. If there are areas of the city or parcels that we want to be specific to, those are things we should start thinking about as well. And then obviously the partners that we want to bring to the table to help bring more resources to pursue these things that we're doing with Metro on a couple of lots. We're doing with RFP on Sparrows. We're doing with an RFP at the Coho site. These are sites that we've had. We have proper local purchase. So I'll stop there and again, we're 10 minutes, but try to get something out of here for the fund.
So are there in fact community land trusts that deal in parkland, commercial land?
There's conservation easements, and there are like organizations that pursue conservation easements to preserve land, not necessarily parks.
I'm familiar with those, they're, Are those really community land trusts? Are they the same thing?
There, as I understand it, I'm a land trust expert. They're similar, but
Because there's some big ones.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, we just had the talk about parks and we know, and we've identified some things that, Metro may or may not be able to acquire. But I mean, we do have these gaps where we don't have people in 10-minute walks of parks. If an opportunity arose, I'd love to see this also be available for that. I will say, the city had, I don't know what the funds would be. I guess that's the question. Can we, where can we use CET funds? Where can we use URA funds? How can we, I think the city has been pretty successful in buying, just over the years, and not really that much since I've been on council. Most of it happened before, but, they bought the Coho site. Actually, I think they bought it by using some utility money, and then they had to pay it back, some utility fund money, and then they had to pay it back or something like that. They bought, different parks, the land that's now Balfour, the land that's now Bowman Bray. So, I like being able to be nimble and buy things when the opportunity presents itself. And so having an identified fund would be awesome.
Yeah.
But we also know we want to do other things with our CET and URA funds. So it's a tough one. Yeah.
Yes, these are all great ideas, right?
Yeah.
Priorities.
Well, and a lot of the strategy document could be just like some of those examples that you're talking about. It could just lay out what criteria you're looking for and so that we have some sort of a roadmap of when things come up that meet this, we do this, and that, type of thing. That's kind of the more middle ground approach that we're talking about, where we're not out knocking on doors saying, hey, we're looking for property.
Yeah.
City
Yeah.
of Milwaukie, looking for property type strategy. It's different than that.
So I would recommend a more strategic approach in terms of stuff that we already know. I'm open to the parks and stuff too, because I think that's great. But I also think that because we can't do all at once, we got to prioritize. So what do we want to focus on? Housing, park space, commercial space. We have all three that we can work with. But I think we need to be a little bit more targeted. And what I mean by that is we kind of already have a little bit of a foundation laid out in a strategy with the scattered sites and with the bill that was recently passed at the legislature. So we can take a targeted approach for our land banking strategy for now, instead of trying to do something long-term because we're so small. We already have those lots within our city limits. We know those lots are going to go up for sale. We know that they're going to be sold probably cheaper than market value because they're owned by the county. And when in my talks with the county, they were going to sell them pretty cheaper. And how we do this is find the partnerships with those short stacks, with those Proud Grounds, with those nonprofits. And the same way that we would take our CET funds and gave Proud Ground short stack $300,000, that's probably how much we could probably buy a lot or two for of those scattered sites, because they're probably all tear downs anyways, right? So if you're going to end up giving that money to the same nonprofit after the fact that they buy it, is there a way that we can give that money to them to help them buy it, transfer the deed over to them into a land trust, and then we're not responsible. So, because I know some people might have reservations about us being quote unquote landlords. And then it's the same way as if we would have granted them the money through the CET funds anyways. It's just to acquire property instead of acquiring material, for example, to fund the build. And again, be more strategic, focus on those scattered sites and see what we can get from this, because we already know that's available. And just keep our ears and eyes open for
So
it.
do we know? I mean, so they didn't get the bill they were trying to get last session to fund land banking.
No, but they passed a land banking bill?
They
They
did not.
passed the one that set it aside. No.
I thought that got through.
No.
No. It did not make it through at the end of the budget.
Well,
So I think.
I do know we still have those available.
NCPRD. I think the county housing authority is selling some, and it's
They
my
are.
understanding that they're holding, those ones they identified for land banking, they're trying to hold on, and they're still, you know.
But they're still
people
selling some.
Living in them. They have been selling some. But
Maybe-
those were, that bill was about turning them over to a land bank so that they
Right.
remain, affordable for people to own. And I will say, having driven around all of them and done a little from the street assessment, I don't think very many of them are scrape-offs. I think a lot of them are pretty solid houses. I mean, people have been living
Right,
for a
but the
long time and
likelihood-
maintain them.
But nobody's gonna buy it and like let it sit, right? If somebody's gonna move out of that house and that becomes available, it's the same thing as anything else. You're probably gonna tear it down and build more properties on it,
Well,
like they did with.
the land
way they did
trust
with
thing
Harvey.
is to try and help the people who live in them stay in.
Right, but what I'm saying is somebody moves out, if it doesn't, if you sell, if we buy it as opposed to, because not all of them are gonna be that land trust. There's only a few of them that they're gonna do that with. They're selling off
It's
others.
more
right?
than half.
More than half. And how many total are there?
The city of Milwaukie,
Yeah.
16?
18,
16 or
18?
Yeah.
I mean, that's still something. You know, if there's a way to acquire one or two of those, I mean, I think it's a more targeted approach than trying to come up with a long-term strategy that, you know, I'm all good for looking into this, but I do think that we can still operate in the arena that we currently have. We just might not be able to do it in the way that we might have hoped, but we have an opportunity nonetheless. And maybe a more targeted approach is the way to go.
I would say like if the policy framework has the vision of pursuing one of five, our goal is to create affordable units, 8% under whatever that. Well, it's like a sweet spot. And we want to create as many as possible. Then that kind of gives, that's actually setting the priority and the partnership. Because we might be able to purchase a small piece of property, but we won't be able to do what the vision is for the land bank strategy unless we have that partnership piece. So this is just helpful because I think get it all out there so we can start trying to formulate an actual vision and strategy.
I agree with what Councilor Christopher is saying. I think it needs to be targeted, and I think that can come out in the policy. You gave a framework in the right of first refusal. I think narrowing the type of properties that we're looking at to acquire helps reduce step time and makes us more agile by limiting ourselves. I think that I'm all for doing land banking for economic development parks. I think the challenge there is I don't think we should mix funds. Like I don't think it's appropriate to have CET funds dedicated to housing being spent on parks necessarily, but I do think that it is worthwhile to, I don't know if that's legal either.
Yes.
Yes. I think the question that I have is, you say in the staff report, a case-by-case land acquisition fund. Up there, you have a capital acquisition fund, but that's not on the more resource intensive. Can you, maybe seeing as we only have 1 minute, what I would say is I think that some type of fund component is going to be important, and whether that's, I see a few options. One is like dedicating CET funds to this program, and is this what we want to dedicate CET funds for? I think this tends to be a good use of CET funds because it's a one-time expense as opposed to ongoing. I think that in our current URA district, we mentioned land banking as one of the allowable resources. I think reorienting as we think about our next 5-year plan, land banking is one of the strategies in the URA district is a worthwhile exercise. I think it's important to not just like economic development can be co-located with affordable housing. We're talking about that at the Harrison main site. And what does that look like going forward? The other thing, I guess the other component with URA is, I think long-term thinking about, is there another URA district that we fund for land banking in other parts of the city? Is that something that we explore as we flush this out more? Maybe that's a conversation. I think the other component as we think about how do we fund this, I've looked at different programs across the United States that provide density bonuses that then will fund different types of affordable housing programs. And there's one in Austin that has produced a lot of FELOC money where they have the option of building, they can get a FAR bonus or a height bonus in just their downtown area. And they have to dedicate 10% of those housing units to be a certain percent like affordable. They can either do that and build the units and maintain them themselves, or they can pay FELOC. They've netted a ton of money through that FELOC. And so is there some type of option that we can provide that incentivizes not just building affordable housing, but also could generate funds that could go into a land banking fund? But I think that fund component, frankly, I think this is a futile exercise unless we think seriously about how we fund it. And I would rather not see staff waste their time with land banking if we're not spending capital to make it actually happen.
I appreciate that. Thanks. I think what we can do is do a little bit more of a dig into see what programs are out there that help generate those funds. We can also look at the funds we have, and we can give you some realistic ideas of what can be funded, what it can go to, and really what probably won't work or what will work, I guess. And give you a better scope so that we can make that decision. And that's if the rest of you folks also agree. Like, I think there is a case to be made there, is that if you can't buy something, then creating a strategy to buy it is a bit weird.
Yes.
Could I do a quick rollback to the original right of first? I heard what you said about yes and no about your ability to do that. I just kind of come back and I just say, that marketing real estate is just not a core competency of City Hall. And I love your, yeah, we can do some of that. Can you? I mean, everything is more difficult if you haven't done it before, So that's a cautionary tale, that it's just not in our core competency to do those kind of things. So I just leave it there.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I guess I'd like to know, if the one example you know of is Portland, I'm not sure how, replicable that is for us, but I'd like to know if there are smaller cities that have done this. The right of first refusal.
We have, and I know it's 5:33. Thank you for just letting me know it was a short, kind of quick conversation. Happy to bring back this conversation to the council at work session. I think probably what I'm hearing makes sense is to start thinking more about maybe some funding mechanisms, even if it is just a modest fund. Would you say that's true? Not just millions of dollars, I assume.
Yeah.
Something modest would be helpful, and then we can also look into more of the first right of refusal. It's other approaches, so kind of scope it even further.
How did we get Sparrow?
We purchased that from TriMet at a great deal.
How do we find out? How do we find out they were selling it?
Because they used it as a staging area to build the orange line.
And then after they were
we knew
done?
they weren't gonna, it had been an ODOT lot originally, and then ODOT sold it to TriMet and used the staging area for building the orange line and the trolley trail. And then, so we knew it was gonna be.
You got any more ODOT lots?
We approached them, Miriam, but to be
Yeah.
honest.
Government to government is pretty good. Brownfields are also cheap.
Emma gave us firm instructions at 5:30.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you might want to wrap.
You guys.
Yeah.
Mama Emma.
Other than, yeah, thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
We are adjourned. Oh, I have to read this. We are adjourned after the work session. Council will meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 2I to review and evaluate the employment-related performance of the chief executive officer of any public body, a public officer, employee, or staff member who does not request an open hearing. With that, we are adjourned. Great.
Yeah, it's like a 5-day.